Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sophia Rossi stood alone, pressed against the wall in Operations Center Alpha, as digital maps flickered across the big screen and men in combat fatigue sparked updates into headsets. Her uniform was clean, her boots polished, her notepad clutched against her side like a lifeline, but nobody asked her anything. Nobody even looked her way. She wasn't part of the mission. Not officially. She was just there to verify the dive gear, oxygen tanks, regulators, thermal suits. The stuff no one noticed until it failed. The irony wasn't lost on her. 18 months into her assignment at Naval Special Warfare Base Coronado, Sophia had learned the rhythm of invisibility. She walked the base like a ghost with a barcode scanner, precise, diligent, unremarkable. Her nickname among the SEALs was Inventory Sophia, and not one of them had ever asked her how. She knew more about their gear than they did, because she wasn't them. She wasn't a diver, wasn't a SEAL, wasn't someone who ever entered the room and made heads turn. Her small frame and soft voice disqualified her from that kind of attention. No one asked why she often stayed late running diagnostic tests no one had requested, or why she kept a personal spreadsheet of pressure gauge inconsistencies, or studied rebreather malfunctions from past missions. It wasn't curiosity that drove her. It was fear. Fear that one overlooked detail might kill someone. Fear that the difference between success and failure lived in a decimal point. Sophia wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to keep people alive, but fear doesn't come with rank. And when the mission planning for Operation Neptune's Gate began, her warning was ignored. She had caught it, a flaw in the breathing system that couldn't handle the mission depth. She flagged it, wrote the report, submitted it up the chain, but the response had been clear and surgical. Rossi handles the paperwork. Mission planning is handled by qualified personnel. The operation failed. The breathing system failed. A SEAL nearly drowned, and when the team returned, no one mentioned her report. The after-action summary called it a system degradation anomaly. No one said her name. No one apologized. Because in the machinery of the military, silence is easier than accountability. Still, she stayed. She went back to the bay the next morning and resumed inspecting tanks, labeling regulators, and logging maintenance logs no one read. But something had shifted inside her. She stopped hoping someone would listen and started preparing for the moment when they'd have no choice. Why did the emergency alert come 2 hours early? It was 15:47 hours. Sophia had just calibrated a dive computer when the base intercom crackled to life. All personnel, stand by for priority briefing. SEAL Team 7, report to operations immediately. This is not a drill. Sophia froze, eyes flicking to the gear she'd just certified. The tanks lined up on the workbench, the specialized regulators organized by breathing mixture, the thermal suits already folded and tagged. This wasn't supposed to happen until 1800. Something had gone wrong, very wrong, within minutes. The base shifted into crisis mode, voices urgent, footsteps fast, radios alive with chatter. Sophia heard phrases that made her pulse quicken. Civilian vessel, habitat at 250 feet, 12 trapped researchers. A biological research team had lost surface support during a deep-sea expedition. Their underwater habitat was intact, for now, but CO was rising. Temperatures falling, and their breathing systems were not meant for extended entrapment. Without immediate rescue, they would suffocate or freeze. The nearest SEAL team with deep dive capability was on base. Team 7, Sophia's team, her gear. She stood in the back of the operations center, out of uniformed way, her eyes flicking across the screens. Ocean depth charts, habitat schematics, breathing gas logistics, and something didn't add up. The SEALs were planning for a military dive with gear and mixtures calculated for trained operatives. The bees weren't trained divers, they were civilian scientists. The plan, the entire gas mixture, the decompression profile, it was all wrong. They're going to die. She thought the words struck her like a blow, and still, she said nothing. Not yet. Why was she the only one seeing the flaw? Sophia stood a few feet behind Commander Morrison as he gestured at the underwater approach route, flanked by SEAL team leaders, logistics officers, and medical coordinators. They spoke in numbers and timelines, contingency points, and fallback routes. She heard the term standard air mixture 3 times in 1 minute. Each time, her stomach tightened at 250 feet. Standard air would induce nitrogen narcosis in untrained divers. Their oxygen levels would spike, cognition would crash, and they wouldn't survive the ascent. She stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "the breathing gas mixture for civilian? Evac. It's incorrect." Heads turned. Commander Morrison's didn't. "Rossi, your responsibility is equipment verification. With respect, sir, civilians at that depth can't use standard air. They'll suffer narcosis before they reach the surface. You need a helium-based mix with lower oxygen partial pressure." A pause. Brief Heavy Lieutenant Commander Chun, the operations officer, cut in. "They'll be using bailout systems. Standard procedure applies." Sophia tried again. Quieter this time. "Standard doesn't work at 250 feet. Not for them." But the conversation moved on. As if she'd never spoken, she stood there, dismissed, as the mission was greenlit based on procedures that couldn't save the very people they were trying to rescue. And in that moment, she made a decision. If they wouldn't listen in planning, she'd make sure the gear told a different story. What was she about to risk, and was it worth it? The briefing ended. The mission was underway. Sophia was back in the equipment bay, hands steady, face blank, but her mind was racing. She'd been warned officially. "Stay in your lane," Morrison had said. But 12 people were going to die if she obeyed. 12 scientists, non-divers, people who had trusted that help was coming and didn't know the protocols meant to save them were calculated for someone else. Sophia opened her laptop and began rerouting gas mixtures. The SEAL tanks would remain untouched, but the auxiliary kits, the ones labeled for emergency civilian use, those she modified. She switched out oxygen percentages, reprogrammed decompression timers, inserted laminated instruction sheets with step-by-step procedures tailored for untrained personnel. And she did it quietly, not because she was afraid, but because time was against them and the command structure wouldn't catch up until it was too late. By the time the helicopters lifted off, Sophia had done everything she could without a formal order, and then she waited alone in the equipment bay, staring at the empty rack where 12 lives hung in the balance. She knew what would happen. The moment the civilians started losing consciousness, the SEALs would call for help, and when they did, Sophia would be ready. Why was Lieutenant Hayes screaming into the radio? The voice crackled through the underwater comms like a warning from the deep. "Base. Civilians are non-responsive at 180 feet. Breathing systems failing. 4 showing signs of narcosis. Repeat. 4 unconscious." Sophia sprinted to the operations center, still in her duty uniform, heart pounding, lungs tight. She pushed through the chaos, past personnel frozen at their monitors, and stared at the data. It was exactly what she feared, exactly what she warned them about, exactly what they had ignored. The standard mixtures, oxygen-rich, nitrogen-heavy, were compromising the civilians' brains. At depth, the pressure was crushing. The gas was toxic, and the ascent profile they'd designed, it would kill them. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the static. "Get Diving Operations Command on the line. We need expert consultation, now." Sophia took a step forward. "Sir," she said quietly, "you don't have hours. You have minutes." Morrison turned, expression rigid. "Specialist Rossi, you've been given a direct order." "They're dying," she said. "Louder now, and I can fix it." The room went still. No one moved. No one breathed. 12 lives hung in the space between what was allowed and what was right. Was this the moment everything broke or everything began? The comms crackled again. 2 more civilians unconscious, ascent profile failing. Hayes to base. We need new procedures or we're going to lose everyone, Sophia. Didn't wait. She crossed to the tech console and began inputting values. Sir, the oxygen in their mix is too high. At that pressure, it's over 1 atmospheres. They'll seize before they ascend. They need a trimix minus 18% oxygen, 45% helium, 37% nitrogen, and the ascent must be slowed to 12 feet per minute. With decompression stops at 130, 90, and 40 feet, Specialist Rossi Morrison began. But this time, someone else interrupted Lieutenant Chun, staring at the monitors, her voice low and shaken. She's right. It was the first time anyone in that room had admitted it. Morrison turned toward Sophia, eyes dark, torn between doctrine and disaster. You're certain? Yes, sir, she said. I've studied this for 18 months. Every variable, every failure point, I've run simulations. These procedures work. And it's the only chance you've got. The silence that followed felt eternal. And then, transmit the data, Morrison said. How had everything gone so wrong? And so right? Base technical. This is Hayes, receiving updated gas specs and ascent profiles, implementing now. Are you sure about these changes? Sophia's voice never wavered. Lieutenant, if you don't follow this precisely, they'll die, I'm sure. She could feel the shift, from dismissed tech to mission control. Her workstation became a lifeline. Dive computer data streamed. In one set for each civilian, breathing rates, gas pressure, thermal loads. The numbers danced, revealing a story of humans pushed beyond the edge of survivability. At 130 feet, the first stop, one of the civilians began hyperventilating. Civilian 7 is panicking, Hayes reported. Rapid breathing. He's consuming gas faster than we can manage. Sophia closed her eyes, ran the math in her head. Administer the sedative from the emergency kit, she said. Slow his ascent by 50%. Extend his decompression stops by 5 minutes. Each Hayes didn't question her. He executed just like that. She was leading a team of Navy SEALs, not with rank, but with knowledge. And no one had to ask where she'd learned it. They just listened. Why had they ever doubted her? Morrison stood silently beside her, watching. She could feel his gaze but didn't look up. The numbers came first. Oxygen partial pressures, helium load, nitrogen absorption curves, all of it spinning through her mind like music she'd memorized. In the dark, at 90 feet, the modified mix was working. Civilians were stable conscious. The operation, the one that had been unraveling 30 minutes earlier, was beginning to hold. Commander Morrison finally spoke. Where did you learn? To do this? Civilian certifications, Sophia answered. Night classes, weekends, my own equipment. I studied deep diving medicine because no one else on this base did. I prepared for this exact scenario. Just in case. He didn't respond. He just watched as the screen slowly turned from red to green. The impossible was becoming reality. And a woman who had once been just equipment support was now guiding a team of the Navy's most elite. Warriors to safety, because she had dared to study what no one thought she should. Because she prepared, because she didn't wait for permission, and now, lives were being saved because of it. Why was everyone holding their breath at the 40-foot stop? 12 civilians, 12 decompression profiles. 12 ways it could all fall apart in the final ascent. Sophia watched the numbers ticking down on her monitors. They had less than 8 minutes of breathable gas left. Total spread across the emergency system she'd rigged before the SEALs deployed. It was enough if everything went perfectly. If no one panicked, if no one deviated, if no equipment failed 8 minutes or they die. She leaned over the console, eyes scanning each telemetry feed, pressure levels, oxygen saturation, ascent velocity. Her fingers hovered over the controls. ready to transmit micro-adjustments. Base, this is Hayes. We're at the 40-foot decompression stop, all civilians conscious, awaiting final ascent instructions. Sophia took a breath, let it out slow. Maintain 8 feet per minute, no faster. Final ascent time will be just under 6 minutes. You'll hit minimum reserves with under 2 minutes to spare. Understood. Hayes replied, then added, softer. We're trusting you, Rossi. That trust, raw, unfiltered, from the field, hit harder than any commendation ever could. Because she hadn't been trusted. Not before this, and now. Now her words were the difference between breathing and silence. What happens when your forbidden knowledge saves lives? As the final ascent began, Sophia didn't blink. She watched every data point, every flicker in the telemetry. Her mind, practiced by nights alone with textbooks and manuals, adjusted ascent rates in real time. When Civilian 3's oxygen levels dropped too quickly, she slowed their team's vertical rise. When Civilian 9 showed early signs of hypothermia, she adjusted the thermal output recommendation. When Hayes' own dive computer flagged rising carbon dioxide levels in one of the systems, she gave him the override code, the one she'd memorized months ago. Behind her, the operations center was silent. No one dared speak, not Commander Morrison, not Lieutenant Commander Chun, not Chief Webb. They all just watched. As Sophia Rossi, the girl who used to stack tanks, orchestrated a rescue. More complex than anything naval special warfare had attempted in years. Because she'd known this moment might come, and she prepared for it. Not with power, with knowledge. What if the margin for success is a breath? Base, this is Hayes. We're 15 feet from the surface, civilian stable. Sophia's eyes never left the screen. 15 feet was the most dangerous stretch. The pressure gradient was steep, the margin for error microscopic, and the tanks were nearly empty. She whispered to herself, hold steady. Then came the call. Base, this is Hayes. All personnel have breached surface. 12 civilians accounted for all responsive mission success. A breath escaped her lips she hadn't realized she was holding. Cheers erupted in the room. Behind her, Morrison's jaw slackened. Chun sat down, hard, and Sophia Rossi slumped in her chair, her body suddenly too heavy to hold. Tears blurred the screen. 12 people were alive because she hadn't listened to the voices telling her to stay in her lane. 12 people were breathing because she had dared to prepare. When no one asked her to, she didn't want applause. She just wanted them to stop pretending she didn't matter. Would there be punishment or purpose? 3 hours later, Sophia stood at attention in Commander Morrison's office. No celebration, no fanfare, just a desk, a report, and a question in Morrison's eyes. He tapped the file. This is your technical modification log, real time. Calculations, dive telemetry, gas mix adjustments. Sophia stayed silent. I want to be clear, he continued. You violated direct orders. You acted outside your assigned responsibilities. You assumed authority you were not granted. She nodded. Yes, sir. But, he said, voice shifting. Those actions prevented a mission failure and saved 12 lives. His eyes met hers. How long have you been preparing for this? 18 months, she replied. Every night on my own time, civilian. Certifications, emergency protocols, underwater physiology, because I knew one day someone might need something we weren't trained for. Morrison leaned back, exhaled slowly. I didn't see it, he admitted. None of us did. But you saw the failure coming before it happened. She said nothing, because vindication was never the point. Lives were. Could one act of defiance change everything? The review board was called at 1400 hours. 5 senior officers, a room designed for discipline. But this time, something was different. This time, they were listening. Sophia's civilian certifications were passed around like artifacts. Her handwritten protocols reviewed like classified documents. Her telemetry logs, annotated and precise, compared against the SEAL's failed original. The verdict didn't come immediately, but when it did, it shattered the assumptions that had caged her for so long. "Specialist Rossi," Captain Torres said, voice calm but resolute. "Your preparation, while conducted outside official scope, demonstrated initiative, precision, and exceptional technical judgment. Your actions represent a new model of operational readiness." Sophia blinked. Did she hear that right? Effective immediately, you are reassigned to Diving Operations Specialist. Your expertise will be formally incorporated into SEAL mission planning, and your preparation model will be studied across the command as a benchmark for proactive development. Sophia's world tilted not from pride, but from the quiet relief of finally being seen. Everything she had done in silence, every hour of study, every night spent alone with failure reports, had built to this moment, and she had no words, just a steady nod, because she wasn't just anything anymore. She was essential, and they knew it now. Why did her old nickname suddenly sound like a badge of honor? Inventory Sophia. That's what they used to call her. The girl who counted oxygen tanks, who triple-checked serial numbers, who lined up regulators like sacred artifacts. The nickname had once dripped with indifference, polite mockery disguised as familiarity. Now they said it with respect because the entire base knew she'd saved 12 lives, not with rank, not with orders, not with a weapon, but with preparation no one asked her to make, and knowledge no one expected her to have. In the equipment bay where she'd once been invisible, things had changed. Personnel who once ignored her now stopped to ask questions. SEALs who used to walk past without a glance now waited for her input. When she spoke, they listened. When she walked in, conversations paused, not from discomfort, but deference. She had earned something no title could give: trust. And she had done it the hard way. Quietly, slowly, relentlessly. What does transformation look like when no one sees it happening? 6 months after the mission, Sophia stood again in the equipment bay. But it wasn't the same. She wasn't the same. The old workstation, once a tucked-away corner used for inventory, had become a full operations node. Dive computer terminals, gas mixing simulators, real-time environmental modeling. Protocol development for high-risk, deep-water operations. She wasn't just issuing gear anymore. She was designing solutions. The command structure had adapted to her presence, and her influence had rippled outward, far beyond Coronado Sofia. Rossi was now the lead technical consultant on all civilian rescue operations involving underwater environments. Her procedures, the ones she had written in the quiet of her off-base apartment, were now standardized across naval special warfare. The phrase Rossi method appeared in training manuals. Her name had become shorthand for precision, clarity, and foresight. She didn't ask for credit, but she couldn't avoid it now, because every time a civilian was rescued from depth, someone used her data. What do you say when the SEAL who once dismissed you walks in asking for your help? Lieutenant Hayes entered the bay, this time not in crisis, but with a quiet smile. "Got a new one," he said, setting a thick file on her desk. "SEAL Team 3, Philippine Coast, 280 feet, extended duration, possible civilian contact. Sophia." Flipped open the file and scanned it. Depth parameters. Estimated time at pressure. Environmental overlays. "I'll need 4 hours," she said. "Gas mixtures, ascent sequences, thermal gear. Civilian evac options too, just in case. No one else I'd trust with it." Hayes replied it wasn't flattery. It was fact. The trust between them, once uncertain, now unshakable, had been forged in crisis. He had seen what happened when her expertise was dismissed. He had also seen what happened when it was heard. She had saved his life, and the lives of every civilian in that doomed underwater lab. So now, when a mission involved technical challenge or unconventional rescue, his first call was to her, and not because protocol said so, but because he knew could her greatest impact be the one no one saw coming? It started small, a side project, a short document compiling her procedures into a readable format for SEALs in the field. Then it became a curriculum, then a program now. It was the Navy's first civilian rescue specialty module for combat divers, designed by Sophia, taught under her name. Built from the rescue that had changed everything, her students were elite SEALs, combat medics, operations planners, but in her presence, they listened like rookies. Because they knew she didn't come from their world, and yet she'd saved it. She'd made their work better, made their survival more likely, and as her teaching spread, she began to realize something else. It was never about recognition. It was about responsibility. If she could save one more life by sharing what she'd learned the hard way, she would. And if that meant others would never feel the isolation she had, even better, what does redemption look like when it arrives wrapped in silence? One night, alone in her quarters, Sophia found herself staring at the diving certification cards she'd earned long before anyone had cared, each one a chapter in her private war against being overlooked. Each one a reminder of the nights she studied instead of sleeping. She opened the drawer and pulled out the one she kept tucked away, her first certification. Basic open water. She turned it over, ran her finger along the date. It was 2 years before the mission, before the gear, before the title. She had done this long before it mattered to anyone but her. That was the truth. She hadn't prepared for applause. She had prepared because she refused to let ignorance cost lives. She didn't know she would be called to act. She only knew that if she was, she would. The world had finally caught up to her conviction. But she had walked that road alone, and that road, paved with silence, rejection, and doubt, had become the foundation of everything she now stood on. She didn't resent it. She respected it because it had made her strong in a way that no rank ever could. And it had taught her the quiet truth she would carry forever. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why was her office now where mission briefings began? They used to plan missions without her. Now, they didn't start them until she walked in. Sophia stood at the front of the operations planning room, laser pointer in one hand, dive schematic in the other. Around the table sat men and women with stripes on their shoulders and salt in their blood, officers who had spent decades in the field. But today, they were listening. Depth, 280 feet. Seafloor topology uneven, possible sediment disturbance. From recent seismic activity, recommend alternate approach vector here. She pointed, to avoid silk cloud entrapment. She wasn't guessing, she wasn't suggesting, she was advising. And when she finished her analysis, no one questioned her. Not because of her rank, because of her record. She had saved lives using knowledge no one else in the room had. And once someone like that proves themselves in fire, you stop second-guessing and you start trusting. She no longer asked for a seat at the table. She ran the table. What does leadership feel like when you never asked for it? Sophia never wanted command. She wanted competence. But now, SEAL teams requested her by name. Special Warfare Command sent her files to review before plans were finalized. She was no longer a technician. She was a strategist, a systems thinker, a translator between human biology and machine tolerance, between what the mission demanded and what the body could survive. And with that trust came responsibility. Every gear spec she approved was a life she chose to protect. Every protocol she wrote was a contract with fate. She carried the weight without complaint because she knew what the alternative felt like. To be unheard, unseen, unheeded, to watch a disaster unfold in slow motion. Because no one would let you speak. She carried that scar silently, and she made sure no one else had to. Why was the commander's voice different this time? "Rossi," Commander Morrison said, stepping into her bay. "They're sending a congressional delegation next week. They want to see the civilian rescue program firsthand." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Congress?" They've been briefed on your protocols. Word's gotten around. Some folks are saying your work may influence Joint Branch Rescue doctrine. She blinked. That was surreal. 2 years ago, she couldn't get her supervisor to read her reports. Now, policymakers were using her name in national defense briefings. I'll put together the data summaries, she said. No, Morrison replied. I want them to see what you built. I want them to meet the person who saved 12 lives with nothing but knowledge and a refusal to give up. Sophia didn't respond immediately because part of her still lived in that silence, that long corridor of isolation where she had once worked, studied, prepared, hoping for a moment like this, but never expecting it. Now it had arrived, and she didn't feel triumphant. She felt ready. Could one woman's quiet war change the entire system? It already had. The Navy had begun formalizing cross-functional readiness training, encouraging support personnel to develop operational awareness. Her civilian rescue modules were required in every SEAL qualification course that included underwater work. Divers were learning how to think like engineers. Engineers were learning to speak in the language of mission flow. It had started with her, a woman with no combat patches, no deployments, no command, but with the one weapon that mattered most when things went wrong: preparation. And she was still refining it. She tested new decompression models, simulated panic responses in virtual dive environments, partnered with oceanic researchers to expand physiological data profiles, because knowledge was never complete and excellence wasn't the peak. It was a path. Why did she keep the broken regulator? It sat on her desk, the one from Neptune's Gate, the mission they ignored her on, the one that almost killed a SEAL, the one that started it all. She'd kept it, not out of anger, out of memory. A reminder of what happens when silence wins and what happens when someone finally breaks it. She sometimes glanced at it when briefing teams, when tired, when frustrated, when wondering if any of it had really been worth it. And every time, the answer was the same: yes. Because in a world where the line between life and death is thinner than a thread of air, the person who knows why the gear works is every bit as critical as the person who wears it. What happens when the system finally says, "You were right"? It doesn't come in applause. It comes in moments. A SEAL walking up quietly after a mission and saying, "Thank you." A trainee finishing her course and whispering, "I want to be like you." A commander changing a protocol mid-briefing. Because Rossi flagged something, it comes in the way people pause now, before they dismiss an idea, because one woman, one quiet, relentless, dismissed woman, showed them what it cost not to listen. Sophia never wanted to be a symbol. She just didn't want anyone to die, because no one cared what she knew. Now they cared, and that was enough. Why was she rewriting the very rules that once held her back? It started as a request from Base Command, a formal memo asking Sophia to develop a structured training module based on the rescue. But what she created went far beyond what they expected. Within 3 months, a civilian deep-water rescue program became the gold standard for underwater crisis planning. What had once lived in her notebooks and scribbled charts now filled official manuals and training halls. Phase by phase, gas mix by gas mix, step by painful, earned step. She distilled her 18 months of hidden preparation into something others could follow. A roadmap through the complexity she'd once walked alone. And with it, she began rewriting a deeper truth: that brilliance doesn't have to come with a badge. And leadership doesn't always arrive in uniform. What made her different? Her tireless study, her emotional clarity, her refusal to accept "not your job" as a full sentence, was now exactly what the military wanted to replicate. Not contained. What if the most powerful thing you can teach is how to be ready before you're called? Sophia stood before a new group of SEAL trainees. They were strong, confident, bristling with that mix of discipline and danger that defines special operations. But when she spoke, they didn't scoff. They leaned forward because they'd all heard the story, and now they were being trained by the woman who lived it. "Let me be clear," she said, voice steady, hands clasped behind her back. "You might never be called to rescue civilians from a failed habitat at 250 feet. You might never see gas toxicity in real time, but if you do, you won't have time to Google it. You won't have time to ask someone else." She let the pause breathe. "You'll either know what to do, or someone dies." "No one moved everything I'm about to teach you," she continued. "It was once dismissed as unnecessary, but 12 people are alive because I refuse to believe that. So if you're going to dismiss it, do it after. You prove you can do it better." The room stayed silent, but their eyes said it all. They understood. Why was the Pentagon requesting her input? It was surreal. Sophia sat across from a panel of defense officials, her binder thick with data, her voice calm as she walked them through failure case studies from other branches, ones eerily similar to what nearly happened under her watch. "You'll notice the same pattern," she said, flipping pages. "Support personnel see the risk early, operational teams dismiss it, rescue fails. The tragedy gets written off as procedural." One general leaned forward. "How do we fix it?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "You empower the people closest to the systems. You teach them not just how things work, but why you build a culture that values anticipation, not just compliance. And you create space for the unexpected expert to speak." That was the heart of it. She wasn't asking for policy. She was asking for permission, for others like her to rise, to be heard before the failure, not after. Why did she keep returning to the equipment bay? Despite the promotions, the new title, the recognition, Sophia always made time to walk the equipment bay alone. The clink of tanks, the hiss of pressure, the exact feel of a dive computer under her fingers. It grounded her, reminded her that before the accolades, the citations, and the mission patches, she had been the girl in this room, ignored, dismissed, but unwilling to stop preparing. So she returned often, not out of nostalgia, but discipline. Because excellence wasn't something you earned once. It was something you practiced over. And over in silence, if you had to. What's left when everything changes? Sophia once thought her success would feel like vindication. It didn't. It felt like responsibility because she'd opened a door. And now, others were walking through. A combat medic she trained used her ascent protocol to save a drowning civilian during a tropical storm evacuation. A young logistics tech at a separate base cited her procedures in a mission briefing and was listened to. A female sonar analyst, inspired by Sophia's story, created a new depth alert system now being tested fleet-wide. The ripple was spreading. She wasn't just the exception anymore. She had become the beginning. Why did the new tech hesitate in front of her? She was maybe 21, nervous, clutching a notepad. "Ma'am," she asked, "is it true? You used to just do inventory?" Sophia smiled. "Yes." The girl looked confused. "And now you run all this?" "I don't run anything," Sophia replied, gently. "I contribute. I prepare. I ask questions until I understand everything I touch, and when something doesn't make sense, I speak up." The girl looked down, thinking, then asked, "Did anyone believe you back then?" "No," Sophia said, "but I believed myself. That was enough to get me started." And in the girl's eyes, Sophia saw something familiar: determination, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of future leadership. And that was the legacy she hadn't planned for, but the one she was proudest of, because courage is contagious, and now it was spreading. Why did the rescue feel more alive in her dreams than it did in the reports? Sophia sometimes woke up in the middle of the night with the sound of Hayes' voice still echoing in her mind. "Base, they're unconscious. We need new procedures." Now, she would sit up in bed, blinking into the dark, her breath shallow, her pulse racing like she was still at the console. But the room was quiet. No telemetry, no screaming radios, just the faint glow of her laptop left open beside her. desk filled with yet another simulation model she'd built that evening before bed, just in case. Even now, after the awards, after the reassignments, after the transformation, she carried the mission with her. It had never really ended because the truth was, she hadn't saved those 12 lives alone. They'd saved her too from anonymity, from doubt, from a life where her mind was buried under protocol and her voice was never welcome in the room. She hadn't just found her purpose that day. She had proven it. What happens when the system finally admits it got it wrong? The email came late, marked high priority, from a desk somewhere in D.C. It was a request from the Joint Operational Readiness Council. They wanted her to deliver a keynote, to talk about her methods, her philosophy, her mission mindset. The subject line read, "A case for anticipatory expertise. Lessons from specialist Sophia Rossi." She stared at the screen for a long time, not because she was surprised, but because the words didn't feel like they were about her anymore. Anticipatory expertise. That's what they were calling it now. It sounded clinical, precise, but Sophia knew what it really was. Refusing to wait for permission to become who you were meant to be. She hadn't prepared for that mission to impress anyone. She had done it because her conscience wouldn't let her stop. Because she couldn't bear to watch people suffer, because someone in her position was expected to stay silent. And now? The silence was gone, replaced by something else entirely: legacy. How do you measure a life saved? Not in medals, not in rank, not in citations signed by admirals who would never know your name. You measure it in quiet reunions between civilians and their families. In the relief in a SEAL's voice when he says, "They all made it," in the way a base's culture slowly bends, until suddenly, someone like Sophia isn't dismissed anymore. Until people with quiet voices are heard before disaster strikes. That was her real mission, and it was still unfolding. Because the story of what happened beneath the waves wasn't just about what she did. It was about what it meant for every person who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told their contribution was just support. Sophia had redefined what support meant. Support, she had proven, was infrastructure for survival. What if the next mission doesn't come with warning? It was late. She was alone in the bay again, calibrating a new gas analysis system for an upcoming exercise in the Arctic. The temperature variables were brutal. She'd run the numbers 3 times already, but something didn't sit right. She reran the model. And there it was, a minor thermal variation that, under certain pressure fluctuations, could compromise the suit's insulation during ascent. Not fatal, but enough to create hypothermia in under 5 minutes. She flagged it, wrote a protocol, uploaded it to the operations center. No one had asked. No one even knew the gap existed. But that wasn't the point, because Sophia didn't wait for emergencies to start preparing. She prepared for moments no one could see coming. That was her discipline. Now, not hope, not fear, just readiness. Why do people trust her now, even before the data? Because she earned it the way trust is supposed to be earned, not through declarations, but through consistency, through clarity, through the unshakable calm of someone who doesn't panic when things fall apart, because she already imagined the worst and built a way through it. Commanders consulted her not just on gear, but on mindset. What does readiness feel like? One had asked recently. Sophia had paused. It feels like being alone with information, she said, and still choosing to act as if the world is watching, because it might be, someday. And when it is, that quiet integrity becomes the only thing that matters. Could her final legacy be the people she never meets? It was already happening. Technicians on other bases began asking for cross-training. Logistics teams started writing their own emergency protocols. A young Air Force mechanic, hearing her story, created a similar readiness model for desert extractions. It saved the pilot 4 months later when a heat regulation failure nearly turned fatal. Sophia never met that mechanic, never heard her name, but when she saw the after-action report, She smiled, because she didn't need credit. She just needed to know the mission kept moving, that others were building on what she'd started, and that the torch she had carried alone for so long was now held by many, not because the system changed, but because she did, and that change proved contagious. Why did the last mission briefing feel different than any before? Because now, when Sophia Rossi entered the room, no one looked past her. They waited for her. The SEALs, the ops planners, the junior techs who once mimicked the same dismissive glances. They stood a little straighter, listened a little longer, because they understood something now, something hard-earned and impossible to unlearn. That survival didn't always come from the loudest voice or the highest rank. Sometimes it came from the quiet one who studied in silence, who prepared in the shadows, who showed up ready when the rest of the system wasn't. Mission sites at 310 feet. Lieutenant Hayes said, possible chemical runoff in the water. Visibility will be low, and current profiles are unpredictable. We'll need alternate ascent protocols. Maybe staged airlock exits for civilians. Sophia nodded, already calculating. I'll draft them within the hour, she replied. And we'll prep suits with enhanced filtration membranes. I've been testing a new system. It'll buy you an extra 6 minutes of margin if the environment turns acidic. Nobody questioned her because now they didn't need to. What does it feel like to see the machine bend toward you? 4 months, she'd carried the scars of being silenced, being told to stay in her lane, being blamed for wanting to know more than her role allowed. But now, the Navy was actively reshaping itself around her methods. A new program had launched across special operations, integrated operational preparation. Its mission, to train every support role, technician, medic, analyst, to think tactically and speak with authority when lives were on the line. The Rossi method wasn't just a rescue story anymore. It was doctrine. And the quiet technician, once dismissed as overreaching, was now being cited in policy papers, training manuals, and even congressional briefings. But Sophia didn't bask in it. She used it to lift others, to advocate for those still in the shadows, preparing, studying, seeing what others refuse to see, because systems don't change overnight. But sometimes they pivot, and she was the pivot point. How do you lead when you never asked to? Sophia never stood on podiums. She stood beside people, at dive briefings, in simulation labs, alongside the same junior techs who still walked in with notebooks, uncertain if they were allowed to think bigger than their job description. One of them, a young specialist named Torres, once hesitated during a prep cycle for a SEAL gear test. I found a redundancy conflict between the breathing mix and the thermal failsafe, she whispered. But I'm not sure it matters, Sophia. Paz looked at her. Do you think it could matter? Yes, ma'am. Then say it like it does, and back it with data. That's how it starts, she thought. Not with grand gestures, with courage in micro moments, with giving permission to question, to understand, to speak. Why does legacy matter if you don't plan to stay forever? Because you leave it behind anyway. Sophia's training modules were now part of standard SEAL prep. Her breathing gas models had been translated into 3 languages for Allied use. Her protocols were used on 3 different continents during real-world rescues, and yet she still calibrated dive computers by hand, still ran diagnostics herself, late into the evening, because doing the work, not just designing the systems, reminded her of who she was before anyone listened. It kept her grounded, because influence isn't measured by how many salute you. It's measured by how many remember you when it matters most. And now, they remembered. They called her before the briefings began. They checked their models against hers, and when new techs arrived on base, they were told, talk to Rossi. She sees things before they happen. What if the final battle isn't against enemies, but assumptions? That had always been the war, not against failure, but against invisibility, against the belief that value must be proven with a title or a combat record, or a voice loud enough to fill a room. Sophia had proven something else. That conviction doesn't need volume. That competence doesn't ask for permission. That preparation is its own form of courage. The kind that says, I won't wait for crisis to prove I'm capable, and now? They were building around that courage. They were teaching it, living it, honoring it. What did she say in her final report on the rescue? It was simple, clear, and written without flourish. Mission success was not due to luck, nor to deviation from structure. It succeeded because preparation met necessity. The mission parameters failed, but the people didn't. The lesson is not that we need more rules. It's that we need more people willing to understand the rules deeply enough to know when they break. And act. That line, act, would be quoted in lectures, repeated in trainings, printed on the inside cover of next year's operations manual. But Sophia didn't write it to be remembered. She wrote it so no one would forget why she acted at all. Not for recognition, not to be right, but because she couldn't stand by while others suffered. And in the end, what was she, really? Not just a technician, not just a rescuer, not even just a pioneer. She was a reminder that sometimes the difference between life and death isn't who leads the mission, but who prepared for it long before anyone realized they'd need her. Sophia Rossi had once been asked to stay in her lane. She answered by building the road that saved them all.